Now, there are only two of the accused who were British. One of those has two spaces in every one of his papers. Figure it out, people. It'll take you 15 minutes.
As you all know, it's been a while since I've talked about Mr. Satoshi Nakamoto. And in all honesty, this topic has been something I've put on the back burner until I can actually figure it out. Now I know you all are incredibly anxious to watch this video, but if you haven't watched part 1 or 2, you should know that this video is building off 55 minutes of context, so I will link those together in a playlist for you now. Before we dive into the final chapter of this internet mystery, I really need to provide a disclaimer, as a lot of people bring up the ethics of naming Satoshi Nakamoto. For those people that are concerned that Satoshi is just trying to live his life away from the Bitcoin project, that doesn't appear to be the case. Furthermore, I wouldn't say it's unethical to call out someone who is already a public figure, especially when there's enough evidence to suffice it. Unlike Newsweek, I'm not throwing someone out into the public eye who isn't used to it. If Satoshi is still around, then you definitely deserve the right to know. The dust has long settled for cryptocurrencies, and while I can understand Satoshi wanting to hide early on, that argument really isn't true today. I really doubt anything will actually happen as a result of me making this video, and despite the fact that I can line up 100 different pieces of circumstantial evidence, he still has plausible deniability. Just so you're aware, I'm not the first person to settle on this individual candidate, but while many people have speculated this person to be behind the creation of Bitcoin, I plan on going into much more detail here today. As I've had time to take the baton and run with it, I'm certain many people in the cryptocurrency space know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and surprisingly, even John McAfee is one of those people on that list.
Yes.
I'm well aware that 99% of what this guy has to say is exaggerated bullshit, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. If the secret is already out, then the secret is already out. So it's about time that someone actually builds a case for the most likely candidate. It seems like every month another person is popping up to claim that they're Satoshi Nakamoto, and frankly, I'd rather tell everyone who Satoshi is than have to deal with a never-ending battle of Satoshi imposters. So with all that being said, let's finally dive into the final chapter and final clue that Satoshi Nakamoto left us. In the last part, we discussed Satoshi's message to the P2P Foundation forums. This was a day after Newsweek thrust California resident Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto into the public eye. Last time we covered this topic, I pointed out how this message was never debunked and was likely from Satoshi. We ultimately came to that conclusion because despite the fact that Satoshi's P2P Foundation forum account was hacked, we managed to find the date that the hacker recovered this forum account. The recovery date showed a 6-month discrepancy. Also, at the end of the last video, I hinted at this message being Satoshi's final mark on the internet, but there is actually one other message that exists from one of Satoshi's accounts that has also never been debunked. This message was sent at the peak of the Bitcoin scaling drama, and this message also comes from Satoshi's Vistomail email. Now, if you recall, satoshin@gmx.com was the email that was hacked, but Satoshi had another email address, and this email was almost exclusively used on the cryptography mailing list. Understanding the context of this message and what happened in 2015 is crucial in understanding why Satoshi hasn't revealed his identity, so please bear with me as we get into some of the technical aspects. All of this begins with the very first response to Satoshi's Bitcoin white paper on the cryptography mailing list. The very first message came from a person by the name of James A. Donald, and he said, "We very, very much need such a system, but the way I understand your proposal, it does not seem to scale to the required size." Fast forward to 2020, and this individual problem regarding Bitcoin scaling still remains. If you've ever tried to send money with Bitcoin, you probably know the transaction process is far from instant. The reason this is the case is due to the fact that every time a Bitcoin transaction has to take place, it has to be verified inside blocks by the Bitcoin miners. Think of each block as a page in a book. A new block is added to the blockchain roughly every 10 minutes or so. One of the bottlenecks to scaling is that each transaction takes up a bit of space. Currently, there's a size limit that is set to 1 megabyte per block, which means the Bitcoin network can process around 7 transactions per second. As more people start to use Bitcoin, more transactions need to be verified, and since miners can only verify a certain amount at a time, the network hits a maximum capacity, which causes slowed transactions and higher transaction fees. Now, Satoshi added this 1 megabyte block limit in secret in 2010. And the reason he did this was to prevent something called a poison block attack. Essentially, if there was no block size limit, a miner could create a gigantic block, let's say the size of a terabyte. This would force all the other miners to download a massive file, effectively causing a denial of service attack. Now, this caused a divide in the community in 2015, as Satoshi had given instructions before he left that stated that the block size limit would increase in something called a hard fork. A hard fork is an update in which changes are so significant that it effectively creates a separate currency. If Bitcoin was going to accommodate more people, then this issue needed to be addressed, and that brings us to 2015. "2015 is the year that Bitcoin saw a civil war. Gavin Anderson, the man who Satoshi had put in charge, and another developer by the name of Mike Hearn took it upon themselves to provide a solution for the Bitcoin scaling dilemma. In June of 2015, Gavin proposed Bitcoin Improvement Protocol 101. This proposal sought to increase the block size to 8 megabytes and double every 2 years, if the miners were able to reach a 75% consensus and upgrade their software. If this fork was to succeed, then Bitcoin XT would actually overtake Bitcoin as the main currency. Many people agreed that this block size limit needed to be raised at some point in time, but the hard part here is getting everyone to agree on one proposal. Gavin's proposal was quite popular, and while it wasn't perfect, many people saw it as a way to deal with the oncoming influx of new individuals to the network. However, many of the other developers were not on board with this decision, particularly one for-profit company involved in Bitcoin's development. What you need to understand here is that Gavin expanded Bitcoin's team from 2011 to 2014. And throughout this entire time, Gavin and the Bitcoin Foundation were playing the regulatory game. The Bitcoin Foundation, to which Gavin was a founder, was created to improve Bitcoin's reputation after the Silk Road gave it its criminal background. The Bitcoin Foundation was the one hit with threats for running an unlicensed money business, and the Bitcoin Foundation was the one who testified against lawmakers successfully. Satoshi ran away at the first mention of the government, while Gavin's foundation played it correctly and lobbied for the right regulation. While Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin, Gavin's stewardship made it successful. But after all this, in April of 2014, Gavin would step down as the lead developer to focus on promotion. 6 months after Gavin would step down, Blockstream was founded, a for-profit company among a group of top developers. Essentially, their proposal would encourage transactions to be done off-chain, where Blockstream could pocket the fees instead of the miners. You can find a wide variety of opinions on Blockstream online, but I think it's naive to think that venture capital being injected into the development of Bitcoin wouldn't change the goals a little bit.
So is Blockstream's goal to generate profit or to increase the value of Bitcoin?
So we actually have Green Address also, the consumer wallet,
Right.
the mobile wallet. But yeah, largely right now, all of our stuff is free. Mm-hmm. We're mainly focused on R&D. We have been very focused on R&D. We'll have Liquid coming out early next year, hopefully, fingers crossed. And that will be a commercial service that will generate revenue. But the goal is everything will generate revenue. It's not this we're going to build stuff for free forever.
Now, getting back to Bitcoin XT in 2015, If Gavin was successful in getting 75% of the miners to come with him, there would be no point in developing sidechains, and Blockstream's investors would probably be pretty upset. This was a coup, because not only would this force blocks to get larger, it would also give developmental control back to Gavin and Mike Hearn, as Mike was the only one with commit access to Bitcoin XT. Now I want you to pay attention to the following statement given from Blockstream's CEO. When he was asked if the blockchain forks and Bitcoin XT prevails as the dominant chain, then that also establishes a new core team of developers, with Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen in sole custody of the source code. How would this change the long-term governance of Bitcoin? Adam Back responded, Gavin naively thinks he'll do a coup, force the issue, and then invite people to participate in the coup. However, Mike states on the Bitcoin XT website that he is the final decision maker, so it's clearly intended to change the decision-making process, and Mike has not been without bias and controversy. It seems quite unlikely from indications I see that any of the core people who maintain Bitcoin's security will participate in Bitcoin XT. It is therefore not clear that Bitcoin XT will have the resources or expertise to maintain its safety and security. On a small side note, I managed to dig up some of the private conversations that were taking place in June of 2015. One of the really interesting logs I found came from June 16th of that year. In the months leading up to Gavin making this proposal, he was trying to raise the block size for a very long time. Blockstream CEO Adam Back was acting like they were in favor of increasing the block size, but they were just acting like he needed to go through the consensus process. But they essentially would never get back to Gavin. They were fully aware that this would never reach consensus among the 5 developers with commit access, because 2 out of those 5 are Blockstream co-founders, and they were basically gaslighting Gavin to waste his time while they could work on their sidechain solution. I've copied this conversation over so they can't delete it, and it's in a paste bin that you can find in the description. In this chat log, Mike Hearn references how he's heard from investors that Blockstream has the power to stop changes from going through in Bitcoin. Gavin mentions that this conversation would go a lot better if we could all assume that we all had the best intentions. And in this chat, he references Bitcoin being controlled by a council of elders, despite the fact that a vast majority was in favor of increasing the block size. I will leave this in the description for you guys to read through, as I think it gives you plenty of insight to what pushed Gavin to try and do a coup. To be fair, I want to recognize that both sides here were vying for control over the project, but as this starts to play out, I lean more towards Gavin having better intentions. I know this is a bit confusing, so I want to do a brief recap of what we've covered thus far. Basically, by this time, Bitcoin has become successful and no longer fears regulation from the government. Since it no longer fears the same regulation, the primary focus is scaling the network so more people can send money on it. Satoshi originally planned on having a hard fork, which would create a new currency with a larger block size higher than 1 megabyte. A group of developers funded by venture capital plans on profiting by keeping the block size small. Gavin likely realizes this is happening and creates his Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 101 to try and regain control. For this to happen, Gavin has to get 75% of the miners to start using his version of the software. And finally, Blockstream CEO made a subtle threat about security towards Bitcoin XT. Now, hopefully you understand what's going on, because shit's about to get way more hectic. After Gavin posted BIP 101, it really created a sense of urgency to update Bitcoin. Nobody wanted to get left behind, and miners needed to cast their vote and make an informed decision. Naturally, for people to stay up to date, they had to go to one of Bitcoin's main discussion boards. And at the time, r/Bitcoin was the main hub for discussion. But where this gets incredibly sketchy is when moderators of r/Bitcoin ban all discussion of Bitcoin XT. Now, I'm no genius here, but how is anyone supposed to make an informed decision if they can't discuss the topic? Now, you're probably saying, well, why wouldn't people just go somewhere else? Well, when you consider that both Bitcoin Talk and r/Bitcoin were the only main discussion boards with any traffic, and they're both owned by the same person, and that person may or may not have had financial dealings with Blockstream, and the thing you're voting on is time sensitive, so you don't have time to create a new community, Altogether makes it look like you're trying to force your will on the community. I mean, when you have someone directly on Blockstream's payroll stating things like manipulating public opinion isn't censorship, Thamos is one of the most anti-censorship people I know, and I'm not aware of any evidence that r/Bitcoin engages in censorship, and then a conversation comes out with Thamos stating that the way I operate r/Bitcoin is consistent with self-ownership. r/Bitcoin is a private centralized website. I am free to operate it as I wish. I am under no ethical obligation to allow total free speech just because I believe in self-ownership. And my personal favorite, this is in accordance with my principles. I don't take free speech to be an ethical axiom. There would have been no way to prove this conversation was real until Thamos acknowledged it himself. Now, this is a complete 180 from what Thamos used to say before Blockstream was founded. The free and open discussion on this forum help individuals in the Bitcoin community achieve truth. Everyone has some wisdom or knowledge to contribute to a discussion, and everyone who reads the discussion and gains that knowledge gets closer to the truth. This is much more effective than having truth dictated by a handful of moderators or voted on by an electorate. So what could have happened since 2013 that made you change your mind? Blockstream CEO later admitted that Thamos was censoring the subreddit too. However, they claimed that the reason to justify this was because there was vote manipulation going on. They later released a study for proof of this situation, but I find it incredibly convenient that the person who conducted this vote manipulation study was one of the people participating in censorship. Furthermore, I also looked through this study, and the sample data they used was 6 months after this event took place. And I'm highly skeptical because Reddit makes it incredibly hard to track any upvote metrics on their site. Most of the people being downvoted in this data set were the people that were censoring the community and were rightfully hated. It's funny that Bashko would even post this study because even he admitted that this situation escalated to censorship months before. Now, how do we know that Thamos has involvement with Blockstream? Well, in 2011, Thamos mentioned that if people wanted to donate, he would add improvements to the forum. This was the amount of Bitcoin received to his address. Now, after 2 years went by and nothing happened, some people started to ask what was going on. Thamos then mentioned that he planned on creating a new forum software, and instead of, getting help from a community of open source developers, he ended up hiring a no-name studio by the name of Slickage for $100K a month. And tell me, how does a no-name studio land a client for $100K a month when they operated out of this rundown apartment? Inside the technical documents of Slickage's GitHub, a person by the name of Warren at slickage.com was found. People ended up finding out this person just happens to be the same Warren Tagami that works at Blockstream. This means that when this was found, he was working at the same company Thamos hired and Blockstream simultaneously. I understand that developers can have multiple jobs, and it doesn't necessarily mean conflict of interest, but when this company was only used because Warren Tagami used to help Thamos with the forum, and to top that off, this company reports nowhere close to $100K a month in revenue, yet has continued on Thamos' forum software, and it's 2020, and everyone's still using the old forum, something isn't adding up here. To be fair, both Warren and Thamos denied any conflict of interest. They claimed that this evidence was being used to push a conspiracy theory that Blockstream had hijacked Bitcoin Core. But when I tell you who Satoshi Nakamoto is, I think it'll be as clear as day as to what's going on here. On August 15th, 2015, Mike Hearn would write to the Bitcoin mailing list, "Hello. As promised, we have released Bitcoin XT, which includes the bigger blocks patch set. You can get it from here. I feel sad that it's come to this, but there is no other way. The Bitcoin Core project has drifted so far away from the principles myself and many others feel are important, that a fork is the only way to fix things." After Bitcoin XT was launched, it saw a reasonable amount of success. Despite one side having full control over discussion, many new nodes were running the software. Meanwhile, on the forums, individuals were calling for Thamos and moderators to step down. Due to this monopoly over discussion and no compromise being made, this event divided the community to this day, and this event popularized a subreddit by the name of r/BTC. While the subreddit generally caters to Bitcoin Cash, it originated to discuss Bitcoin free from Thamos' censorship. 40 minutes after Mike Hearn had posted about Bitcoin XT, Satoshi would respond. I've been following the recent block size debates through the mailing list. I had hoped the debate would resolve and a fork proposal would achieve a widespread consensus. However, with the formal release of Bitcoin XT, this looks unlikely to happen. And so I'm forced to share my concerns about this very dangerous fork. The developers of this pretender Bitcoin claim to be following my original vision, but nothing could be further from the truth. When I designed Bitcoin, I designed it in such a way as to make further modifications to the consensus rules difficult without near unanimous agreement. Bitcoin was designed to be protected from the influence of charismatic leaders, even if their name is Gavin Anderson, Barack Obama, or Satoshi Nakamoto. Nearly everyone has to agree on a change, and they have to do it without being forced or pressured into it. By doing a fork in this way, these developers are violating the original vision they claim to honor. They use my old writings to make claims about what Bitcoin was supposed to be. However, I acknowledge that a lot has changed since that time, and new knowledge has been gained that contradicts some of my early opinions. For example, I didn't anticipate pooled mining and its effects on the security of the network. Making Bitcoin a competitive monetary system while also preserving its security properties is not a trivial problem, and we should take more time to come up with a robust solution. I suspect we need a better incentive for users to run nodes instead of relying solely on altruism. If two developers can fork Bitcoin and succeed in redefining what Bitcoin is, in the face of widespread technical criticism and through the use of populist tactics, then I will have no choice but to declare Bitcoin a failed project. Bitcoin was meant to be both technically and socially robust. This present situation has been very disappointing to watch unfold. Satoshi Nakamoto. Soon after, many threads started to pop up that someone was attacking Bitcoin XT nodes. Kicking them offline made them unable to vote. Bitcoin XT was supposed to reach consensus by January 1st, 2016, and between the span of August to December, two separate conferences were held by the name of Scaling Bitcoin. I want to point out that 2015 was the only year that they held two of these. Bitcoin XT failed to reach a 75% consensus, and on January 28, 2016, the patch was reverted. I personally believe it to be very apparent that Bitcoin Core didn't play by the rules. In my opinion, this was a community power struggle. Anyone who supported Bitcoin XT was ousted from Bitcoin Core. Coinbase, for example, supported Bitcoin XT and then had themselves deleted off the Bitcoin.org website. I believe that everyone knows who Satoshi is at Bitcoin Core, and the reason you're probably not seeing anyone speak out is because of something called a non-disclosure agreement. So when Gavin came out publicly and said this,
I do think Craig is Satoshi. I met with him in London. He fits the kind of person that I was interacting with way back in 2010. And he provided some cryptographic proof using the private key from the very first Bitcoin block to show that he possessed that key. So although it's impossible to prove something like that 100%, I think for me, he's proved it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Gavin later mentioned that there was a chance he could have been bamboozled by Craig Wright, but I personally think he never thought that Craig Wright was Satoshi, and he was in on it. Craig Wright has been someone who is known to have wanted to have a larger block size. It makes sense that Gavin named someone else as Satoshi because he wanted to win community support over the block size. If Bitcoin Core didn't know who Satoshi Nakamoto was, then why would they revoke Gavin's commit access as soon as he named Craig Wright as Satoshi? They upheld revoking his commit access despite knowing he wasn't hacked. It's almost like they didn't want to see any evidence because they already know who he is. Before I cut to the chase, there's one Reddit comment I want to read from Gavin. In this thread sharing an article about how Craig may have tricked Gavin, someone insinuated that Gavin might know a little bit more about the situation than he leads on. Gavin replied, "I won't violate people's privacy or repeat things told to me under non-disclosure agreements, so I'm stuck. I'm not going to say anything more, except I suspect someday the full story will come out, and it'll be made into a movie." I'm convinced this message is 100% real, and I think you will too when I tell you who Satoshi is. But I completely understand everyone's skepticism with all of the things going on in the community at the time. The email originates from the original Visto mail servers and was not spoofed in any way. The domain owner hadn't changed since 2007. This email was never compromised. Now let's take a look at the writing style. Notice the double space after a period, and Satoshi writes in British English. Notice the spelling of honor. I know there's still some room for doubt here, but that's kind of the point. I'm certain he could have proved his identity, but the goal of this message was to influence people. Once Bitcoin XT failed, there was no longer a reason to follow up. Our final clue is that Satoshi Nakamoto is against a larger block size in the present day, and it's time for me to reveal who he is. When it comes to this or any topic, I have to say the simplest answer is likely correct, and it's no surprise that one candidate literally matches every single detail to Satoshi Nakamoto. Despite how many people will tell you that Satoshi Nakamoto is a collective or Satoshi Nakamoto was made by the government, there's not really any evidence to suggest that. If you recall from part 2, I stated that Satoshi was either trying to throw us off the trail at every given opportunity, or the clues should be taken at face value. As it turns out, he didn't go to that great of lengths to hide his identity. The first clues that we should take a look at are which technical documents were used to create Satoshi's white paper. There are only 2 core ideas that were infused into the creation of Bitcoin. Sure, you had a lot of applied cryptography and other aspects of the project, but the main 1,000-foot inspiration was the B-Money proposal, as it outlined all of the ideas for a digital ledger that we see in the blockchain. And the second component was the proof-of-work system, also known as Hashcash. This is used in the Bitcoin mining function and is used to verify all of our transactions. The person who invented Hashcash was Adam Back, Blockstream's CEO. And throughout this video, you may have noticed I put some importance on Blockstream's attachment to a lot of the things that were going on in 2015. So let's take a look at Mr. Adam Back. Adam Back is referenced in Satoshi Nakamoto's very first email. This email was sent to Bldy, and in this message, Satoshi was reaching out because he wanted to get the date of publication for Bldy's B-Money. The email reads, "I was very interested to read your B-Money page. I'm getting ready to release a paper that expands on your ideas into a complete working system." Adam Back at hashcash.org noticed the similarities and pointed me to your site. This email implies another message was sent to Adam Back, but what's interesting here is that Satoshi supposedly corresponded with him, but there's no evidence to ever suggest that. We have correspondence between Satoshi and basically everyone else, except for Adam Back. When Adam has been asked about it, he'll always virtue signal and say that he would delete or shred any evidence. That's interesting that you want to protect Satoshi in this case, but when someone who obviously isn't Satoshi like Paul LaRue makes a headline, you'll spread obvious misinformation. That's incredibly convenient, because after going down this rabbit hole, I'm convinced the emails never existed in the first place. The day that B-Money was announced, it didn't get any attention. There's only about 9 discussion threads on the cryptography mailing list about this B-Money proposal, and 2 of them are about the link being broken. This paper was so obscure that the person who actually wrote about it was Adam Back. Don't get it twisted, Bldy definitely wrote the paper, but Adam Back copied the paper onto the cryptography mailing list and asked for feedback. In the next email in this thread, it basically outlines the entire thing. B-Money seems to be a book entry eCash system related to Hashcash, the book open and distributed. Anonymity is derived from the fact that participants can be pseudonymous. Hashcash would be a good candidate function for Way's decentralized minting idea. To create value, you burn CPU time, just like Hashcash, but Way's distributed open book entry system allows you to pseudonymously exchange value. So here we directly see that Adam just said that B-Money would be a candidate for Hashcash and even mentions that pseudonyms would be a great way to get money out anonymously? I've looked through all the discussion on B-Money on the various mailing lists, and most people didn't even like the idea. Now, if you're wondering whether Adam Back could have pulled it off, I would say 100% yes. He's the perfect candidate. The guy has a PhD in distributed computing systems, which would be the perfect background for building a decentralized computer network. Bitcoin was coded in C++, and Adam codes proficiently in C++. Something we need to consider is that Satoshi Nakamoto is an inventor. He created a new piece of technology. And this guy was filing multiple patents a year up until April of 2005, and then he just disappears until March 2010. which is a full year after Bitcoin was released. I looked through all of the mailing lists that his email was associated to, and he goes dormant from 2007 until 2010. He was also not writing any academic papers during this time. According to Adam Back, Satoshi supposedly even sent him the software once it was released, but according to him, he shrugged it off and didn't mine a single Bitcoin. Adam has never provided proof of these emails either. Now I know what you're thinking, well maybe Adam didn't have any interest in anonymous payments anymore. After all, that was back in 1998. But here's the thing, around 2007, right when Satoshi started on Bitcoin's development, if you read Adam Back's Wikipedia page, which he wrote himself, it reads, he has an interest in privacy technology and electronic cash. So you had time to update your Wikipedia information, stating that you're interested in anonymous payment systems right when Satoshi started development on Bitcoin, but when Satoshi finally figured out how to do something that you planned on doing since 1998, you don't even bother to open the software? How convenient. It's not like you were busy during this time. Call me crazy, but if we dive deeper into Adam Back, more coincidences just start lining up. What about Satoshi's writing style? Well, if you recall from part 1, he uses British English, and whenever possible, he is known to use double space after each period. Adam Back frequently includes double spacing after each sentence in his various writings, and he's British, so British English is also included. Remember how Satoshi hid a political message inside the Genesis block that references the Times, a UK newspaper? Well, what if I told you Adam Back is known for leaving political messages with compact code? And he grew up in London, where the Times newspaper was distributed. Moving on, not many people know this, but web design wasn't Satoshi's specialty. He actually received help in creating the forums from a guy named Marty Malmy. But if you take a look at the earliest capture of Bitcoin.org when it was done by Satoshi, it's incredibly minimalistic. And if you take a look at cypherspace.org, Adam Back's website, and look at the earliest capture, it looks incredibly similar to Bitcoin in layout. Satoshi Nakamoto also looked up to Hal Finney. Do you know who else looked up to Hal Finney? Adam Back. As I mentioned earlier, there's a large gap in Adam Back's digital footprint, and he reappears on Twitter in 2010. When he resurfaces, he becomes a resident of Malta. Malta is the location you move to if you're about to receive a large amount of money that you don't want to be taxed heavily on. Do you remember from part 1 when Satoshi said, I make this appeal to WikiLeaks not to use Bitcoin? If you dig through Adam Back's 19,000 tweets to the very beginning when he took to Twitter, his first year on the platform was him advocating about the discussion of WikiLeaks. In 2012, he started updating Wikipedia articles about Bitcoin, providing detailed insight into the history of it. But something you should know is that the guy didn't get involved with Bitcoin until April of 2013. Once again, this guy cared enough about Bitcoin's history to update its Wikipedia article, but not enough to mine a single Bitcoin. It's also incredibly interesting that Blockstream and its entire purpose is to hire people to further the development of Bitcoin. The guy has received over $100 million in funding, but here's the thing, he's never once committed a single line of code. How would these investors know the guy's qualified to further the development of Bitcoin if he's never touched the thing? Either these are the world's dumbest investors, or he's Satoshi Nakamoto. Do you guys want to know the date that Adam Back does finally join the Bitcoin forums and start participating in the community? April 17th, 2013. This is the exact date that an article by the name of The Well-Deserved Fortune of Satoshi Nakamoto came out. He joined back the day everyone figured out how much money Satoshi Nakamoto had. In his introductory post, he starts off bossing people around. He doesn't have a natural progression into the community whatsoever. His first post is telling others to fix certain explanations on the Bitcoin wiki. A few days later, someone ended up linking the post about Satoshi Nakamoto's fortune on the forums, and Adam chimed in saying, well, that's kind of an unfortunate privacy bug. Coincidentally, I thought I fixed a few potential issues like this in Hashcash. For Satoshi now, maybe he can find a private buyer via a lawyer and Swiss banking services. Or perhaps we're forced to implement ZeroCoin to protect him. Anyway, don't sweat it, people. He can probably get by on a few million play money and his post-privacy bug fix mining hoard, until there's a solution on his post. When was that bug fixed, by the way? I can't tell from those low-res graphs. And he's probably holding out for the 10K Bitcoin era anyway. Have you ever noticed that we only know about Satoshi's first year of mining? Well, it's incredibly interesting here that Adam Back implies an entirely separate hoard of coins. And the bug fix he's referring to is so incredibly obscure How would you know about a mining bug fix that was never included in the changelogs in 2010 when you supposedly got to the forum 2 days ago? And the fact that he mentioned these Swiss banking services that are confidential, that might explain why Blockstream shifted gears to profit off the block size being small. We may never know, because Adam Back, just like Blockstream, never wants to make the financial intentions clear. Later on, Adam Back actually wrote to the author of this article and said, "Question for the blog author. When was that bug fixed? What proportion of the 130 mil did he spend or cash? That's just curiosity. And I suppose it seems that you're getting too close. You might want to stop in Nakamoto's interest." What I want to clarify here with this entire video is that I'm not saying Satoshi doesn't deserve his wealth or that he doesn't deserve to have control over the project, but what I can see a lot of people having a problem with is when you act like Bitcoin is this community-driven project. Furthermore, acting like Satoshi is living this private life and has to hide from government agencies is a complete virtue signaling lie. And this claim that his privacy needs to remain a secret just because people might come after him for his coins is complete bullshit when you consider that other currencies have faces to them and they can guard their wealth with no problem. That's like saying every rich person has to hide away from the public. This person gives public talks, this person has 150,000 followers on Twitter, and this person is a spokesman for a business. Do you want to know the real reason Satoshi hasn't revealed his identity? I'll let Adam tell you himself.
So first one, in your opinion, who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
I really don't know. I would suspect it's one person, just because of consistency of code and difficulty of keeping privacy and secrets across a group. But other than that, yeah, I think nobody really knows.
If you get an opportunity to know, who is it?
Well, I think actually it's better that we don't know, because it helps for Bitcoin to be considered like a digital commodity, that there was somebody that discovered the commodity, but there's not somebody. People have a background in hierarchical thinking. So some people are wired a little bit different and they don't like authority and they want to think for themselves. But many things about society are hierarchical. And so if you look at what the media tends to do, sort of mass market media, and the average person, they see something new and they want to who's in charge of it? Who should I ask? Could we ask somebody to change something if it doesn't suit us? And so, if there was an identified founder, that thinking would lead lots of people to asking or demanding things. So the fact that that founder is kind of apocryphal, nobody knows, and presumably he's not coming back at this point, right? That takes away that opportunity,
I mean, heaven forbid people think for themselves, and that seems to be a common theme in the Bitcoin project. In 2015, the entire community was in favor of increasing the block size, but Blockstream and all the other developers forced that upon everyone else. Considering that Bitcoin is supposed to be this censorship-proof money, that's really, really ironic. And not to mention the blatant manipulation when Satoshi wrote that everyone has to agree on a change. If you ever use r/Bitcoin in the present day, it's still heavily censored. You're not allowed to be critical of Bitcoin in any way. Forget that a lot of other projects have already fixed its problems. Because if you don't, and you don't put your faith in it, then Satoshi Nakamoto can't deliver you from the evil banks. Heaven forbid people in a community-driven project ask for something to be catered towards the community. The problem here is a conflict of interest. With hiding your identity, you have two sets of investors to please. Those who invest in Bitcoin, who want it to succeed in the long term, and investors of Blockstream who want to push transactions off the main network to make money. And you've created a borderline cult when the same people that used to be obsessed with decentralization now actively support Blockstream's alternative centralized network. This situation has been very disappointing to watch unfold. This is Barely Sociable. Have a good night.